What does that mean? Well, we give you some advice. We are always telling you at the beginning of an academic task 1 to do these things, to summarize the information. Now, when you summarize information, that means you don't give every piece of information. You take the most important elements. You select the main features and you make comparisons. We call this an overview in task 1. If you don't produce an overview, a comparison, saying this is like that, but that's different from something else, then you will not succeed in this assessment criterion. When you are confronted, when you face a task 1 task, you have to ask yourself some important questions. Ask yourself this: what patterns do I see in this graph, in this table of figures, in this illustration? There will always be patterns because the people who construct these tasks will always construct a task that has something that is obviously a pattern in it. So what are those patterns? There will always be an exception to the pattern. These numbers are going up, but this number is going down. These are big, but this one is small. So look for that. If it's a graph, there will always be a time element, and that's the horizontal axis. Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it years? Think about that. Think about how many elements there are in the graph. How many things are we comparing exactly? And how many number values are there? Is it the size of a population? Is it the amount of money that people earn? Is it temperature? There are different number values. Let's look at an example. This is a typical table of figures. This shows the 6 largest countries in the world in terms of area. In 2012, they had a certain amount of people in them. They had a certain amount of land that produced food. And you'll notice here that the word arable is used. Well, you don't know that word, maybe. But in IELTS, we will tell you the meaning of a difficult word. And here, if you look at the bottom of the table, there is a definition. Arable land is land that can be used for food production. And then we have the area of each of those countries. Now you can see obviously that one very important feature is that Russia is by far the biggest country. And the other countries are fairly similar. But that's a pattern. But there are differences. So what are those differences and what are those similarities? Well, we can see that the area of the country does not really influence the population size, because Russia is by far the biggest, but it only has the 4th largest population. Smaller countries like the USA and China have by far more people in them. One element is that we can see very clearly is that the USA and China have an equal area, but very different population. There are exceptions. There aren't any exceptions to the general trend, that is that arable land leads to greater population, but we can see that there are exceptions in the size of population in terms of the difference between China, for example, and Canada and Australia, which have very small populations relatively. There is a time element here. And the time element is 1 year, 2012. Now, this is important. What tense are we going to use when we describe this information? You will use the past tense if you say 2012. If you don't mention the year, then you could use the present tense all the way through. When you compare things, you've got to compare 6 countries and 3 variables. Now, there are 6 countries. If you don't mention every one of those countries, you will be penalized. If you don't mention every one of those variables, the area, the arable land, and the population, you will be penalized. And finally, the number values are square kilometers, arable land, and the millions of population. But use different words. Talk about the area. Talk about the amount of food that can be produced. Talk about the number of people. These are ways to express the same meaning, but they will tell the examiner that you really understand the information.